Okay, so you'll notice that I'm not really getting deep into any of the readings this week in these videos. That's on purpose. I think their readings are pretty straightforward. The only one I think is not that straightforward is the piece on narrative architectures by Henry Jenkins. He's an academic. He's writing in a really academic style. I think it can be kind of a lot to just get dumped into and have to figure out. So I do want to talk about that reading and the main purpose of it and just clarify what those narrative architectures are. The idea behind this piece that you're reading is that transmedia stories that are transmedia on purpose, that are operationalized, use one of four narrative architectures. And really, the idea of a narrative architecture is this. Jenkins, who's writing this piece on narrative architectures, is saying, listen, we tend to think of a story as being a linear thing that goes from start to finish, that is written by one person, that everybody else just kind of reads or sees. And he's saying, I don't think that's a good way of thinking about stories. We should not talk about stories in this way. Instead, we should think about stories as architectures. So a storyteller, instead of writing out a plot, a linear thing, and then delivering it to other people, we should think, yes, that happens, but we should think about that as just being one way to design or architect a story. So when he says architectures, he's just meaning something that is designed, a format that is designed, just like a house is an art piece of architecture. Somebody decided what shape it was going to be in and what rooms it was going to have. So it's really just about design. So he's saying, yes, there are stories that are linear and they're just kind of given to the audience. That's just one architecture. That's like a house. And maybe you can also make a skyscraper, and maybe you can also make a underground bunker, right? He's saying that's not the only kind of architecture or design that exists for stories. And so he comes up with four architectures that he says exist for stories that we should think about. And so when we talk about storytelling, instead of thinking about someone who just decides the linear plot of a story and then gives it to the world, we should think about how people who are storytellers can create four different types of architectures. And these are the architectures: evocative spaces, enacting stories, embedded narratives, and emergent narratives. So I just want to give you an example of each one to help it make it a little bit more clear. Even though the reading's full of examples, it might be helpful to see some examples that aren't in there. So evocative spaces are narrative architectures where the storyteller, instead of saying, I'm going to make a plot that's linear and I'm going to put it in a fixed form and give it to the world and they can just have it, they think about building a space that recalls elements of a story, like the Star Wars Lego games or the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. So here's a good example of an evocative space. A storyteller made this. Just because it's not a linear plot doesn't mean it doesn't have a story. So the people who created this ride in the Wizarding World of Harry Potter had to think about how this ride would evoke the idea of the story of Harry Potter. So evocative spaces evoke sort of a feeling of the story. So if you knew nothing about Harry Potter at all, you might have a good time on this ride, but it might read to you as like, I was on a ride with a dragon. Whereas if you know the world of Harry Potter, then you have a lot more context to bring to this experience. And the experience is evoking your knowledge of that story. It's giving you what I might describe as Harry Potter vibes, right? You're going to understand a lot more about this world of the ride than somebody who doesn't know anything about the story. So the ride is evoking the story of Harry Potter, even if it's not necessarily adding to the story in any significant way. So an evocative space is one that uses story elements like characters and, locations to give the audience who is experiencing it a feeling of experiencing the story. Another example might be like the Lego Star Wars games. This is like when you play a Lego Star Wars game, like it's not Star Wars, right? Like it's kind of Star Wars, but it's a crossover with Lego. And what Lego is doing is they're evoking the idea of Star Wars. These Lego planes that you fly look like Star Wars planes. They're evoking the idea of Star Wars. The characters aren't always exactly the same characters that exist in the Star Wars universe, but they're evoking those characters. They're reminding the player of that story world. And again, someone who knows the story world is going to have a more rich and deep experience of a game like this than someone who doesn't know anything about the story world. If you don't know what Star Wars is, you're not going to get the same evocative element if you play a game like this. So narrative architecture number 2, enacting stories. These are stories enacting, right? Acting, where the player or the person hearing the story is put at the center of it. So they're kind of a story is made in which the person who is experiencing the story kind of gets to be in the story, gets to be in the center of the story. So an example that I think is really cool that I will open is this game called Spent. The idea behind this game is to show people who have never experienced poverty what it's like to live in poverty. So it's enacting. It's saying to a person, come play this game. And when you play this game, you're going to be the central character and you're going to enact someone else's life, someone else's story through this experience. So let's open this real quick. Okay, so we're invited into the story. We're told that we should imagine that we're somebody who is struggling financially. We've lost our house. We're down to our last $1,000. And in order to make it through the month, we need to find a job. So we're taking on the role of the main character of this story. And we have to make decisions. I can be a server, I can be an office temp worker, or I can be second shift warehouse associate. I'm just going to pick second shift just so we can move on. So as the main character, we make choices and we see the effects. An embedded narrative is a story that is predetermined and pre-written, and it's revealed to the audience. That could mean a standard story, the way you think about it. A book, for example, it's pre-written, it's revealed to the audience word by word, chapter by chapter, or the audience can reveal the story to itself in any order. So a linear or non-linear pre-written story. And an example that I think is really cool is this documentary called Bear 71. It's the story of the life of a bear. And this bear was tracked, and the people tracking it learned a lot about the life of this bear. I won't give any spoilers, but there's a dramatic ending to the story of this bear. And instead of just telling the story of the bear from start to finish, the storytellers created a embedded narrative space. Okay, so here we have Bear 71. It's probably going to take a minute to load on my computer. Okay, so you'll see that I'm actually being loaded into a map, and this is the map of where Bear 71 lives in this story. And I accidentally clicked on something, which was a video of the bear and a moment in the story of its life. And on my own, I can choose, on my own time, I can choose to close that and to do some more exploring of this story. So the story is pre-written. All these videos are pre-recorded. The text is all pre-written, but it's...
Banff National Park in the heart of the Canadian Rockies. Humans here live closer together than any other place on Earth.
Sorry, the website had sound that I was trying to turn off so I could talk. I got it turned off. The story is being, it's pre-written, it's pre-recorded, all these videos are pre-made, all the text is pre-written, but I, as the experiencer of this story, can reveal the story to myself in the order that I want. So I can interact with the story in whatever order is interesting to me, but I'll eventually come to understand the whole story. So that's an embedded narrative. Embedded meaning that it's pre-written and then it's put into something that the audience can see. And then last but not least, emergent narratives. These are sandbox worlds, basically. Second Life, Spore, The Sims. These are narratives where the author has no idea what story will happen. Instead, they create the rules of a world, and the audience is invited into the world and allowed to play in it. That's why it's called a sandbox. You play in it, and you try all the different actions that are programmed, that are possible, and different narratives emerge based on what the user tries to do and what actions they take. So emergent narratives, emerging means, growing out of. So the storyteller creates a world and rules and characters, but they don't decide what those characters are going to do inside that world. They give the audience the control to go inside the world, work within the rules, use the characters to take actions, and create their own stories. So that's everything I wanted to talk about with the narrative architecture piece. I know it's pretty dense and academic, but stick with it. It's pretty interesting, and it's got lots of other kind of interesting examples. If you have questions about it, let me know. If not, I will see you next week.